Hello, and welcome to another episode of Overpowering Emotions, where I talk about all things big emotions, anxiety, emotion regulation. I'm in the Back to School series talking about things that might stress our kiddos out that as it relates to school. And today I'm going to be talking about school refusal. And actually, there's so much to cover. I'm going to be breaking this into more than one episode. School might not be everyone's favorite place in the universe, which I don't understand. I actually really loved school when I was a kid. But looking back, I had some pretty fabulous teachers who really made it awesome to go to school, especially in junior high. Elementary, I don't remember too much other than my grade 4 teacher, who was horrific. But grade 5, 6 had the same teacher. It was totally awesome. So that makes a big difference, which I will be talking about. But for some kiddos, even the thought of school is just so overwhelming and even terrifying. And we've got these kiddos who've got a fear of going to school. It's anxiety that's school related, and that's what I want to focus on today, the school-induced sort of anxiety. These kiddos might even have panic attacks, just the thought of going to school. So it could be in their sleep, on their way to school, right? Just thinking about school just sets in that anxiety. They experience significant distressing anxiety, and so trying to relieve that anxiety by avoiding school altogether. And by avoiding, they're reinforcing that anxiety because they get relief. I don't have to go. I feel better. I'm at home, safe and sound, exactly what our brain wants us to do, right? But it's just a band-aid approach that's short-lived. So we see the school refusal, school avoidance. It's a major problem of school phobia, and it's a psychiatric crisis that we need to make sure that we're addressing immediately. And so that's why I wanted to focus on that right now, because if you're already seeing signs, that's a problem. And signs now or later on to come, sometimes over any breaks or long weekends, we can start seeing this to settle in, because it becomes a very slippery slope. Right? What starts out as one day, or you pick them up one afternoon a little bit early, they miss here and there. It literally can start turning into years of not going. And I've known kids, right, who've stopped going in elementary, who never returned at all in high school. And it was always a struggle. And then I see them when they realize, I got to go to university. I need to attend class, but they haven't had any experience of going to class. And so then that anxiety is even greater, right? The longer a kiddo's away from school, the more ingrained that anxiety is becoming in their head, and the pattern of avoidance and absenteeism, it just becomes a huge problem. So the longer they're away, returning then starts to feel harder and harder, even if the reason why they were going was different from anything else. Now, just being away starts to be harder, because now I've missed all this work. I've missed out on all these important learning opportunities, and I've fallen behind. That could be it. Maybe they feel disconnected from their peers, right? Am I still going to have friends? Or what are they going to think when I come back? What are they going to say, right? So they start to worry about other people. Maybe other people are going to make a big deal of them or being away, or forget them completely. I actually had one girl, I thought it was going to be a success story. So they had come see me. They had already been working with somebody else, had gotten some success, had gotten her back into school. She hadn't been in school for quite a long time, got back into school, and everyone made a big deal out of it, right? So I thought it was going to be a success story, because they had a little mini party and all her friends were like, oh my gosh, you're back at school. It's so awesome to see you. And they were positive, running up to her like it was a good thing. Congratulations for coming back. So welcoming, right? But she was so overwhelmed. She left early that afternoon and stopped going again. And they weren't able to make any progress. And so that's why they came and saw me. So there's all sorts of reasons, even where we think it might be a good thing, it kind of goes sideways. So the big problem with avoidance is they never have the opportunity to learn, I can manage that anxiety of going to school. Whatever comes up that day, the next day, right? And even in that one example, she had a momentary success of getting to school, but it was so much more overwhelming, and she wasn't prepared for that. Nobody helped her prepare for that. Like, I've got this no matter what, and looking at all the different angles of what might happen. Because remember, anxiety is the story, the belief that I can't handle it. In this case, it being school. I can't handle going to school and what people are going to do or say at the work or whatever it is. And so if they avoid, they get stuck in avoidance because they never learn that I can handle it. And for any of our kiddos who avoid school and have even stopped going altogether, the goal is to get them back into school as fast as possible, where they can learn. It can be a safe place. It can be an enjoyable place. I feel connected here. I do belong here, right? But we really do need to act fast, because the challenges that come with school avoidance from one afternoon, one day, 2 days, it starts snowballing exponentially to the point it just becomes nearly uncontrollable, and everybody's at wit's end and nobody knows what to do anymore. So don't let it go for more than a day or two, because it's just the beginning stages, and I've seen it snowball really fast from there. So there's so much that I want to cover about this topic. I do need to break it down into more than one episode. Today, I'm really focusing on the foundation of what we should know about school phobia and school refusal, and then we'll look at what to do about it for the next time. But one thing I want to set straight is, for sure, no blaming. So we got to stop that right now. It's not the parents who aren't doing enough regarding their child's education, or doing enough to get them into school, or, following through with their obligations, like under the Education Act, making sure your kids get to school regularly on time. Scolding them is not helpful. Blaming them is not helpful. Fining them, threatening them, reporting them, all things I've heard about, not going to be helpful for the kiddo. And it's definitely not the kiddo's fault, right? We can't be blaming them. It's a real mental health challenge. It's not a form of laziness. It's not a lack of motivation. So I don't really like the term school refusal to begin with, just because it's not like they're delinquents that simply aren't choosing not to go, right? There is school avoidance that's anxiety related. Certainly, I don't want to rule out. Certainly, there's kiddos who avoid school because they're attention seeking. Maybe they just rather do something better. Like, I just want to go watch the movie. My daughter actually, just the other day, was like, October 21st, Mom, I'm missing at least one class because the new Arctic Monkey album's coming out. So I need to spend some time listening to Arctic Monkeys. I'm like, dude, not cool. Like, that's not a good reason to miss school. So sometimes there would be something that they would rather do, go hang with friends, right? I'm not talking about those kiddos where they would just rather be doing something, maybe disengaged. Although I would say a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about, maybe not some of the exposure pieces, but just engagement, connection, those are still going to be valid and important for them. But I'm really going to be focusing on the kiddos who are experiencing that severe, complex, emotional, physical symptoms of anxiety that come along with it. Now, the unfortunate part is our anxious kiddos, they're just usually not getting the supports they need. And that leads to some sort of crisis, i.e. not going to school, which is why I'm so happy that you're listening so we can learn to better support these kiddos, whether you're another mental health professional, an educator, a parent. This is such a big issue and it needs to be addressed system-wide. It's not just the parent's job, right? It's a huge thing that we need to look at. Now, I do want to say school phobia and school refusal, it's not a new phenomenon. Right? We have information about school refusal from the 1930s. It's definitely gotten worse, especially with COVID and those long breaks of kids not going. I mean, certainly it has become such a crisis that I've never seen before. Not going to school, it's a major problem for lots of increased risk factors, certainly school dropout. Already my daughter's saying the day I turn 16, I'm dropping out of school, which is just around the corner, right? But it can affect long-term problems too, not just the immediate dropping out of school, but poor social connection. Obviously, low income, unemployment, getting in trouble with the law, a whole host of physical mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, all of those are directly correlated with suicide. And actually, suicide is the number one leading cause of death for our youth. So there's a lot of risk factors involved in this. It's not just about the immediacy of school, not being in school. I mean, school is a foundation for our social well-being, emotional well-being. There's so much just expanding our brain and growing, there's so many different things. When we look at school phobia, it can show up in lots of different ways. And we might hear some of their worries, like I suck at school. Like it could just be, it doesn't even have to be the avoidance of school. And maybe they're still going, but you're hearing these messages. I suck. I hate recess. I'd rather be at home doing what I want to do. It's no fair that I have to go to school. All the other kids are jerks. My daughter actually, I keep bringing it back because I am a little bit concerned, right? But my daughter, she just already counted down the days. Like she hasn't even been at school for a week yet. And she's already counted down the days. And she was very upset to learn there's 286 or something, 280 some days left until the school year's over. Right? And so that's a message that I'm listening for. So some might directly articulate the fears, right? What if people don't like my haircut? What if you forget to pick me up after school? What if, right? They're voicing all the worries. Oftentimes, a lot of these kiddos don't even say anything. Maybe they don't have message, but they feel it physically. They complain, I'm too sick, I'm too tired, I'm too headachy. Right? Emotionally, we can see the fear a lot come out, but it can come out in self-deprecation, it can come out in irritability, aggressiveness, anger, all of those emotions. They tend to build up and come out behaviorally. So yes, behaviorally avoiding school, right? Where they don't want to go to school every day, but it could be that they're still going and still show school refusal. Maybe they're just pleading. You still get them out the door, but they're pleading, please don't take me, I don't want to go today. Right? Maybe they're leaving school early. Maybe they're having trouble getting up in the morning, or they're just showing up late all the time for their classes, right? There could be even more subtle signs. Not handing in their homework. Maybe they're refusing to do any homework or any in-class work at school so that they can take it home instead. I see that a lot. Maybe they're texting parents all the time. Where are you? What are you doing, right? What time are you going to be home? Going on lots of bathroom breaks or lots of trips to the office with a headache or just lots of complaining about school, all of those things that I've talked about. If you've got a kiddo who's still going to school, but maybe showing some of these signs, definitely get on offense and help make school a positive place so that school avoidance doesn't settle in. Make sure that they've got the skills. If they're too embarrassed to do classwork in class because they're worried somebody's going to make fun of their writing, I mean, we need to address those kinds of things. It's really important too, especially with COVID, there's been a lot more hybrid models where some kids are, doing some, going to class for a couple of days and doing some work at home or just a little bit, of online and both. We want to make sure that we're watching those kiddos too. If they're wanting to do online, because that works with their learning style. I had a kid who did a lot of stuff in the arts, and so he was able to do his art stuff and do things in the community, but had the flexibility of doing his work. Or a lot of my daughter's friends are pretty elite athletes, and so they have to go training, especially in the wintertime for skiing, for example. They have to go up to the mountains all the time, and so they're missing a lot of skill or of classwork, but they have a hybrid model where they can actually do their homework at any time, right? So that during the day they can go and do their skiing or whatever it is, whatever sport they're doing. But if they're wanting to do online because of anxiety, I would consider getting them back into class as fast as possible. So we got to differentiate, why are they online? For some kiddos, the school avoidance, it could happen suddenly, right? Just overnight something happened and now they don't want to go. But especially if there's a fight, we might see that, or they just broke up with their boyfriend. They don't want to face the outcomes, right? Or they just don't want to face whatever happened. But it can start really gradually and it can sneak up on us. And I've got so many families who ask, how did we get here, right? Like it was fine. And yeah, it was one day, but now all of a sudden it's been 9 weeks and they haven't gone. So, causes... I don't like focusing too much on causes because the brain likes to make irrational associations. I've talked a lot about this, but I do think it can be helpful to look at some of the causes here with school phobia, because often there are things that we can actually do to make kids feel safe. They still need to learn the process of managing anxiety, right? But we can use all the anxiety strategies in the world. And if they don't feel safe going to school and there's like chronic bullying or they have a severe learning disability or something, it don't matter how much we're working on the anxiety. So we got to make sure, is the anxiety the primary thing going on? They still need to, even if it's secondary, still need to learn to manage that anxiety. But we want to make sure we're addressing any underlying things that are getting in the way of their success. So yes, we are still going to focus on the process of managing anxiety, building their skills to manage that anxiety, which I am going to get into, but there's other considerations that need to be addressed. So it's important we're doing a thorough behavioral assessment when we look at anxiety, and most certainly when we look at school phobia, because we need to have that understanding exactly what's going on for the kiddo to be able to create a solid return to school plan, right? If we're creating this plan but throwing them in with a learning disability, we're not going to be addressing some of those learning gaps that are causing the anxiety in the first place, for example. There are lots of different reasons why a kiddo might avoid school. So there's typical anxiety provoking reasons, like, just avoiding negative emotions that come up. Something really specific could be happening, if there was a bullying incident or if they're struggling with reading. Sometimes there is a very specific reason that's causing that anxiety. If there are, like I said, those legitimate causes like bullying or a learning challenge, they have to be addressed immediately. Or a really mean teacher, sometimes we've got to manage, how do we let things roll off our back? But we got to see, are there things actually going on? For other kiddos, though, they might not know, right? Some are socially anxious. Some might have separation anxiety. Some, would just rather go with the parent to work or stay at home with their parent instead of going to school. Some might worry about their grades, writing a test. They want to skip the day that they're writing a test. Maybe they want to avoid getting into trouble. They feel like they're getting in trouble all the time. Some though are sick. They're worried about being sick at school, like throwing up at school or having a panic attack, right? Or something like that happening. If we've got those kiddos where they're not going to school and it's become an ongoing problem, there's usually common themes that usually come up. Again, every child is different, but we can start just thinking about some of these common themes, especially for the ones who've chronically not been in school. Maybe they're escaping distressful situations, like riding on the bus. Maybe that's just so distressing for them. They're trying to escape that situation, or any idea of having to read in front of the class. Here in Canada, we've got the Youth Mental Health Canada, and they investigated school refusal and found that most of the kiddos who participated in their pretty large-scale study, they didn't like school. So they didn't like school, and there was some negative experience in school that really made it hard. Many of them feel sick. That's usually a very common thing when we're looking at some of that school refusal. They feel sick whenever they need to go to school. And so it's Sunday night, right? Thinking about school the next day, or at the end of a vacation, or the morning of every day they have to go to school. Those kiddos usually have pretty significant reactions having to go to school, and they tend to miss a lot of school, more than a month of school in the year. That's a lot of school. So if they feel excluded, they don't feel safe, they don't feel like they've got friends, they don't feel like they're part of a school, they're not involved in school activities or clubs, if there's no adults there that they feel like they can speak to, or that they think that care for them or support them, the more likely they are to miss longer periods of school than those who are connected, who do have friends, who feel that they're cared for, who feel that it's a safe place. And that safety and belonging, those two pieces are so key. And we want to make sure we're focusing on those in our interventions. Certainly the child's skills of managing anxiety, but I've created my resilience pyramid. And I've talked about this before, and just like Maslow's hierarchies, right? We can't work on the individual child skills of managing anxiety, that's at the top of the triangle, without making sure the basis of the rest of the triangle is there. So safety certainly is a key. If a kid's terrified of snakes, being bit by snakes, we can't work on that skill if he's constantly being thrown in a coffin with snakes. I know it's totally morbid, but that's just an example. We can't keep throwing them back into that experience. It doesn't matter how many skills, that we give them, they're still in a really unsafe, terrifying situation. So we just want to make sure that those pieces, and safety and belonging, are the key areas that we want to make sure we're focusing on, because they're the biggest contributors to school phobia. If they don't feel like they belong and they feel isolated from students and feeling isolated from teachers, they're not going to do well socially, emotionally, academically. And most of those kiddos, they want to learn. They want to participate. They want to go to school. They want to do well. That's really important to remember and to consider. They just don't feel connected. So I think that that's really important for us to think about. Does my child feel connected? Does my child feel safe? They might not be able to articulate that, but we want to start looking at those messages. I just want to go through some of the really unhelpful things that have actually been done. And really, I've seen it, and it's been done out there. We see it out there as well. And even recently, that only makes the situation worse. And kids want to avoid using any kind of punishment. That's never helpful. I often share my story of the Little Mermaid, just in case you've never heard it before. My story of the Little Mermaid is, her father has banned her from going to the surface, right? Up to go with humans. And of course, she goes up to humans, and one day Bastion, I think that's her little fish friends, comes and starts talking in front of King Triton and mentions the seagull. And Triton's like, Seagull, what are you talking about? She's been to the surface. Finds out that she's been to the surface after he's banned. So he goes to the Little Mermaid's grotto and destroys everything, all of her possessions, essentially as a punishment. Essentially as a punishment to teach you a lesson to never go back up to the surface again. Now, when we punish, we usually think, oh, Daddy's right. I shouldn't have gone to the surface because Mummy died. She was killed from those barbarian humans. I should never go again, right? We think that when we punish, they're thinking about their behaviors and what they should do differently. No, that's not true, ever. That's what we think that they should be learning from punishments. But whenever we punish, kids think about us, how mean we are, how much of a jerk we are, and then they're sitting there brewing in their resentment of how awful we are. They're never thinking, oh, Daddy's right. No. What did the Little Mermaid do? She's like, screw you, Dad. I'm going to go see the sea witch and get my pair of legs permanently so I could just stay up top permanently and never see you again. That's what happens. Punishment does not work, right? So punishing them, especially with anxiety, does not work. And in the case of anxiety, punishment only makes that anxiety worse. And it can create a lot of self-shame and other self-esteem issues. And it ultimately only leads to more missed days of school, right? And more pushback, maybe defiant behaviors and delinquent behaviors. Those kiddos don't need more pressure. They need support. Now, a lot of kiddos who do get back to school, a lot of them, unfortunately, are expected to catch up on the work that they missed. Most of them are singled out. They're being blamed for faking it, faking being sick. You're not really sick. Just suck it up. Just do your work, right? Not letting them call home. And I get that a lot of school, like, oh, here we go, right? They're just not very welcoming, not really supportive. They're not addressing their needs. Even if they're welcoming and are supportive, their needs aren't being addressed. Here's all the work that you missed, bud. Here you go, right? Very few kiddos actually receive the support any from school at all. If they get any, like nearly none get anything from school. That's where we're trying to get them back into. That's where they need the most support, but they're not getting anything, right? And there's a lot of things that schools have done to contribute to the isolation a lot of kiddos are already feeling. Calling parents to come pick up your child. So if you're a teacher, think about these things. This is actually pushing them out. Suspending a kiddo of the challenges that they're having. And remember, aggression and anger, it's a secondary emotion. I've talked a lot about this. The primary emotion behind those behaviors is fear. And so maybe we are maybe they are tipping their desk over because they've been asked to read out loud. It's not that they're being disrespectful. That's the behavior. That's the symptom of trying to protect myself. And maybe they're not even. Maybe it's just annoying. Okay, fine, just go to the office. Okay, fine, just go call home, get them to pick you up. Right? I had a little guy, and I've talked about him before, who's been expelled from 3 different schools before he was 7, and it was all anxiety related. A lot of these kiddos get negative feedback about their challenges, and they're even bullied, not just by other kids. Why are you being such a baby? Why are you sick all the time? But even adults, even school staff, they're criticized and publicly shamed for missing school. And a lot of them aren't getting the learning supports, the emotional supports that they need in school, and definitely no support for school phobia. Now, again, not about blaming. Teachers aren't out there to make kids miserable, although my daughter is convinced, right? She came home the other day and was like, I swear, teachers just want to torture students. They want to make students hate school. And it's saddening because I know no teacher wants that. I know no teacher. I do a lot of PD training and I get them to reflect, what kind of teacher do you want to be? What kind of teacher how do you want to be remembered by? Right? I know if you're a teacher listening to this, I know you want all of your kids to succeed. And I know that you're doing your best. The reason I'm bringing this up, though, nonetheless, is as adults, we fall into these traps all the time where we are trying to teach a lesson, trying to problem solve and fix things for our kids, right? And I know parents are under stress, teachers are under stress. You got a curriculum you got to follow. There's no funding for education. I know all of those kinds of things. So it's just about raising awareness. What am I doing to be able to support these? Now, as part of figuring it out, obviously, we want to turn to the expert in the area, the student, right? I don't want to get caught in the content and make this a big deal. But we got to play detective. That's important, right? And them playing detective of what's going on. They might be able to articulate some of the things that we're trying to guess at. So when we're trying to figure out what exactly is going on for this kiddo, we need to be able to bring them involved, get them involved in this conversation. If they're like, I don't know why I don't want to go to school. Again, I don't want to get caught in on the whys. But let's start looking at different areas. Maybe it's through Socratic questioning, but maybe it's through them just collecting data, through their day. I had one kiddo mention that they told their crush they had a crush on them. And the crush was like, oh, thanks. But it was kind of awkward, right? Like, wow, great. And then the kiddo who had disclosed that was terrified to go to school the next day. Right? So that's a very specific reason that they might be able to articulate, although they might be embarrassed to even share that. So they might keep it to themselves. But a lot of the time, kids can't really articulate what's going on for them anyways, right? They find it really hard to process everything in the moment. So I love scaling questions and breaking things down. I love a scale, from 1 to 10. 10 is awesome. Best thing in the universe. 1 is totally sucky, right? So from 1 to 10, what would you rate your teacher? Oh, 9. Awesome. What makes them a 9? What's your teacher doing? So I'm not directly asking what's freaking you out. I'm gathering information. I'm asking these questions and they're talking. So if they're rating their teacher a 9, super nice, super caring, super flexible, that's probably not contributing to their anxiety. Okay, what about some of your classmates? Out of 10, 1 to 10. Oh, they're like a 4. Okay. Who's a 4? Like, what makes it a 4 and not a 1? So obviously there's got to be some good classmates. Tell me about the jerky classmates, right? So tell me about the good ones. Tell me about the jerky ones. And what could we do to bump this 4 up to a 5? We're gathering information, lots of information, right? And so you can have all of those follow-up questions and you can ask about reading. Oh, that's a 9. I love reading. Science. Oh, that's like a 2. It's so boring. It's so hard. The teacher's so mean. I don't get anything. It's going too fast. She calls on me, right? Always calling me out. Gym class. Oh my gosh, it's a 1. It's so overwhelming. Recess time. Oh, I love recess. So we can start scaling. We can start gathering up all of that information. And if you do have those follow-up questions, right? What are the good parts that make it a 6 and not a 2? And what can we do to bump it up a little bit more? What can make it just a little bit better? These kinds of questions, it gets kiddos thinking in a different way. It takes the focus off the anxiety, right? Because if we're making it all about school and what's stressing you out, I've talked about in the moment, especially if they're feeling emotions, they're going to start feeling a little bit more anxious anyways. It's just going to become one big knot. They can't process all of that. So we're taking out the anxiety part of the conversation, which is important. So we're not making it bigger and so that they have the opportunity to process this information. But we want to make sure we're checking in too with family things. Maybe it's not just about school. So this is why we want to do a thorough assessment. So maybe there's some pieces at school, but maybe there's family things going on that makes it hard to get to school in the first place. So maybe asking scaling questions 1 to 10. How hard is it to leave mom? Like 10, no way. There's no way I can leave mom. 1, super easy. Like I've been able to leave mom since I was 2 years old, right? Oh, 8. Okay, so leaving mom is pretty hard. Yeah. Right? And so maybe there's some separation anxiety that needs to be addressed, or the pet, right? Maybe the pet's getting old. Maybe this is the last time they're going to see their pet. They're not sure if the pet's going to still be there alive when they get home, right? Maybe somebody's sick. Maybe they're worried that mom's having fun at home, right? Who knows? There's all sorts of things that could be going on. So these types of questions can be really helpful. Now, again, I don't want to focus too much on cause. I do want to focus on some of the contributing and maintaining factors. That's always what we want to look at. And so it's looking at, accommodations that are being provided, what is maintaining those anxiety. And I talk a lot about that in previous episodes. So go back and check those episodes about what maintains it, reassuring, right? Accommodating, all of those things. If we're letting kids avoid, that's certainly a huge maintaining variable. But I also want to look at not just what's contributing to school phobia and school refusal, but there's things that can serve as protective factors too, because that's going to be important to understand so we can build that into our intervention. So first we got to understand what the kiddos, their personal social emotional learning needs are. And are they being met? Because a lot of time I see kiddos with ADHD or learning disabilities that they're just not being addressed. And that is a leading contributing factor to their school refusal. I've kind of already talked about that. Now here in Canada, the majority of kiddos demonstrating school phobia have some sort of individualized program plan. So we do see the learning challenges a big piece of that, right? A lot of these kiddos actually had psychoeducational assessments. They're professionally diagnosed with some sort of exceptional need. But there were a lot of kiddos too that certainly had very evident learning needs, but they weren't ever officially diagnosed, never officially had that assessment. So we really want to make sure we've got a firm understanding of what their needs are and making sure they're being addressed. Because when they're addressed, that's a major protective factor, obviously, right? If they're feeling successful and their learning's going great, that's going to be so important. So then we can take some of those causal risk factors that I kind of did mention, and the reason I did is we can flip them on their heads, right? So kids are more likely, if we know that school phobia is a big problem if they're not feeling safe, well, protective factors if they're feeling safe at school, right? If they've got an adult, a trusted adult that they feel safe that they can talk to. Obviously, the more adults we have, the better. That's good. If they feel like they can belong, that they've got friends, that they're actively involved in the school community, like extracurricular clubs and things like that. If they have physical breaks throughout the day, they know they can get up and move. They know that they can learn without fear of judgment or being ridiculed, right? If they're able to pursue the things that interest them at school, all of those things we want to make sure we're boosting. And so that's why focusing on things like connection and belonging and that self-efficacy is going to be really important. And part of the self-efficacy is, can I pursue things that I'm interested in at school? And that's one of the things that my girls, I think they loved COVID was because I would give them research topics and they could research whatever they wanted. I didn't care, but I knew through researching, they were reading, they were writing, right? They were still learning and engaging their brain, but they loved it and jumped into it because it was things that they were interested in. And so I do a lot of PD day training with teachers about how we can engage the disengaged student, because more than 20% of our kiddos are actually disengaged. And those disengaged kiddos are the ones who are avoiding school, whether or not it's anxiety, but there's usually some underlying anxiety. So how can we turn things around? So I'm going to leave it there for today. That's kind of the foundation before I go into treatment, which is a lot of information as well. But I just wanted you to start thinking about, and that's going to be really good if you've got a kiddo, whether you're working with them, they're in your classroom, or it's your child. Start playing detective. Start doing an assessment, trying to figure out what are all the different variables that are going on. Is there an underlying learning need? Is there an underlying bullying situation that's happening? How can we figure that out? So you're just gathering information. You're playing detective. How safe do your kiddos feel? And asking questions like, if you could take 2 teachers from school or 2 adults from your school onto a stranded island, you could bring your family, but you had to pick 2 people from school, who would it be and why, right? And you can start getting, are there people in their life that they feel that they can trust? And, you can start getting those messages without directly putting them in a place where they start feeling anxious and can't process through those informations. So I will leave it there for today. Thank you for joining me. Help those kiddos be bold and courageous. And I will see you next time when I go into the treatment sort of aspects of school absenteeism because of anxiety. Take care.